Hello, welcome to the Firaxis live stream.
It's your turn. All right.
Oh, are we on? Are we
Yes,
on?
we're on. We're on.
Woo! I'm Sid Meier, and we're going to be talking about our soon-to-be released game Starships today. We have a special guest, Jake Solomon. One of the things we've kind of noted in our previous live streams is how there's some similarities and some differences to our other game, XCOM. I thought it'd be fun to have Jake here today to talk about his design philosophy, the reason he made some decisions. I'll chime in with kind of some of the similar ideas behind Starships. And hopefully we'll have a deeper understanding of how these games came to be the way they are.
Yes, and I'm honored to be here. And you're my boss, so I have to be here. But I'm still honored to be here. I'm very, very happy.
I'm honored to have you, Jake. Well, let's take a quick look at Starships here. We're kind of entering into a battle. In this case, we were up against one of the other civilizations. And we've got our fleet of starships. And I guess it kind of leads to one of my first questions here. Starships is a turn-based game. And in XCOM, you also decided to use turn-based as your kind of fundamental mechanic. Even though there's a lot of action, there's things are blowing up, things are being shot.
Yeah.
But we both kind of decided to use turn-based as the basic mechanism for the tactical parts of the game. Do you want to kind of talk for a second about why you went that direction?
Yeah, because I grew up under you. Because it's a superior form of gaming. I think that there's a lot of, it is interesting because a lot of times when you start something out, you think about did you ever think about real time for Starships?
Actually, the tactical part started off in real time.
Did it really?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so I think you always think of that, as a designer, like, can you do it in real time? I think it's always kind of like, well, but the benefit that turn-based gives you, specifically in reference to XCOM, I remember I'd always go through this thought exercise of, well, what if it was real time, the soldiers were moving around? But the problem is that without the game being turn-based, the player doesn't have complete control. And if the player doesn't have complete control of the situation, then you really can't have consequences. So in XCOM, you can lose your soldiers. They can die permanently. And the only reason that works as a mechanic is that the player had control down to every step their soldier took, every action they took. They control the entire thing. So when something bad happens, they at least have a way of tracing back and saying, like, oh, that was my mistake because I shouldn't have taken that shot, or I overextended myself. And then because of that, they accept the consequences. And they're really, you can have a lot harsher consequences, I think, in a turn-based game. And so that it creates the ability to really impose consequence comes from turn-based games. I just don't think that's very challenging, I think, to do in a real-time game anyway.
Otherwise, the player would blame the game instead of kind of take responsibility. If anything went wrong, they would.
That's right. Even if it's not the computer's fault, although it probably is the computer's fault, the psychology would be like, well, I didn't want that soldier to walk over there. The AI steered him over there, that they died, and then that wouldn't feel fair.
Fair,
so.
Exactly.
Right.
And if a game is not fair, it's not fun, basically, I think.
Yep, that's right.
Again, I think I went through the similar process with Starships. I think you can almost tend to always start with real time. And every situation we imagine kind of feels like a real time situation. But then as you start to play, the real time kind of happens in your head, where you're projecting and imagining that soldier running over there or that starship traveling over there and what's going to happen next. But you want to have that time to do that projection, that imagining, and turn-based kind of gives you as much time as you need to plan that next move or imagine what's going to happen next.
Right. And you got all these, you've got all these awesome numbers and trade-offs and the interesting decisions, which but you do.
Write that down.
Right. Take a note. It's a great idea. But otherwise, I can't weigh the trade. There's awesome in real-time games. There are trade-offs to weigh, but it's got this fuzz factor of time and everything's kind of blurred a little bit, and that's very fun and exciting in one way. But if you want lots of crunchy numbers and stats and making the choices clear, I mean, it has to be turn-based so I can take time and say, like, oh man, if I move my starship here, I'll be out of, then they don't have a line of fire to me, and that's very, very difficult to do in real time. But something like Gettysburg was
Gettysburg was real time.
I mean, it was real time, but it was slower movement, so you could make
manage,
those kinds of.
and you could pause the game. But yeah, to be clear, we can make games that are not turn-based. We are capable of making real-time games. The Pirates.
I have no idea if I'm capable of it, but I did work on Pirates. Yeah. So.
Pirates was a real-time game.
That's right. Pirates was awesome.
Railroad Tycoon. So we can make real-time games,
Yeah.
but often we choose turn-based as a kind of a more appropriate technology.
We love turn-based.
We
don't
love
we?
turn-based. Turn-based is so cool. Again, looking at our game here, it kind of reminds me of another question I kind of had for you. It seems like most of our games involve some sort of a map or some sort of an interesting space. And I remember when you were developing XCOM, I remember seeing these gray box levels where you were kind of, in a very clear and simple way, kind of exploring what made a level interesting, what made a map interesting. And it kind of, what is it about maps that you think are what do they add to the game?
Yeah, it's that tricky mix of all design kind of boils down to the theme and the mechanics. And I think that the mechanics being the actual systems of line of sight and cover and movement distance, and then the theme being the wrapper, the narrative wrapper for it, where it's like, okay, you're in a city or you're in space, some starships, And so first you work on the mechanics side of the map, and you say like, boy, it's nice if there's, like in Starships, you've got a certain density. You probably wrote a function for a density of like, asteroids,
right,
and where all these different warp holes should be. So you kind of like think of it first from like a mechanics standpoint, and that's why we used like gray box on XCOM. We used all these like just little gray boxes and just put them out there in the world, because first we're concerned about how far do soldiers move, how much cover do they need to make the game fun, how close should the cover be together so you can flank other enemies. And you work that out first with just little stand-in gray boxes, and then you sort of go, okay, well, what is that gray box? I don't know, make it a trash can. So it gets hard when you do mechanics first, but I think, you do the mechanics of all the little bits out on the map to make the choices interesting, and then you sort of put the theme over the top of it. So, it's, in that sense, these are very similar. I mean, you kind of have the asteroids that block on either side. It is kind of cover. I mean, except it's sort of two-way, right? You can't shoot through them.
Right. It's actually, I think for Starships, it was a challenge because maps aren't necessarily intuitive in space.
Right.
And thinking back to science fiction movies and TV shows that I've seen, there's not a clear idea of combat tactics. A lot of times they use a trick, or not with small unit tactics. I think we kind of understand ideas like cover and range and things like that. But we almost had to kind of invent a mechanic for starship combat that used a lot of those familiar concepts. I think that's what maps do for me, is put you in a world where you kind of get what's going on. It's good to hide behind these things, or here's a direction. I'm going to be able to travel this way, but I'm not going to be able to go that way. Maps bring so much kind of automatic information along with them that it's kind of the reason that every one of our games pretty much has one map, two maps, multiple maps, because they're just kind of they bring so much stuff for free almost. So we kind of designed this mapping system for Starships. What would kind of provide cover, so asteroid fields. And then we got to invent new things like our narrow passages that open and close, and our jump gates where you can kind of go in one place and pop out another place. It's kind of the fun of science fiction, to being able to add those things. But I think the map, once we had the map in there, it kind of defined the parameters of gameplay.
Yeah, the maps, like for Starships and for XCOM, maps become about like positioning. Mm-hmm. And then for games like Civ, then it gives you like territory. Those are so intuitive that it's kind of hard not to do. Whether you're doing tactics or whether you're doing strategy, there is so much like a player can look at. Even people who don't play games could look at a Civ map and say, oh, I kind of want this. And you can look at, and it's better to have more territory. Those are some very intuitive things, controlling territory. And then in tactics games like Starships, like XCOM, being able to position your units. I think, yeah, there's so much that comes out of that.
Yeah.
What did you do hexes?
Hexes are okay now. You know, for a long time, hexes were
the domain of the wargamer.
We were not allowed to use hexes because it just felt, you know, instantly too complicated, too geeky, too wargamey. Square. Everybody understands squares. Nobody understands hexes.
We're turn-based strategy designers, so.
But a couple of years ago, it kind of became okay to use hexes again, and you know, I think Civ led the way in some ways, and so, you know, of course, we love hexes, and they give us some. The map becomes a little more logical when you have hexes.
But
yeah. So
facing really
great.
Interesting.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So there's.
Which I'm terrible at, by the way. Facing, I should, as like a public service announcement, facing is very important. Don't forget to face your ships, because if you do, then you get shot in the rear, you know, so to speak. Where the shields are weak at the back of the ship, right?
Exactly.
I'm very aggressive, so I'm just always like aiming for the shot. I shoot, and then everybody they just shoot. So, armor, or a lot of armor. Actually, it's a good thing.
Well, there's a cool wonder you can build called IntelliShields, which actually allows your shields to be fully effective in all directions. So you might want to look for that one in the strategy layer. But yeah, I mentioned the first prototype for Starships actually used real-time combat in 3 dimensions, and what I found was you had to really simplify the ideas more and more. 3 dimensions,
really?
space, you know, but all that kind of stuff.
See that.
But we really couldn't do all the stuff we're doing here with the different modules and firing torpedoes and stealth, and it just became work instead of fun. You know, and, you know, if you want a game with depth in it, you've got to really respect the players' you know, how much time they have to process things, et cetera. So it became work instead of fun, and then when we transitioned to turn-based with a map, all of a sudden things really came together. So that was. I think you'll agree, every game has this journey that it goes through. You know, the good ideas that you keep, and the not so good ideas that you have to be willing to throw out. And
the ones that seemed like good idea
at the time.
You hold on to them, and you hold on to them, and then they.
No.
Right.
No. All right, let's continue on our mission here.
Right. So they now all your ships can be upgraded in different ways, right?
Yes,
so
that's one of the kind of fundamentals of the game, is that constructing starships is one of the things we wanted to emphasize.
Who doesn't want to do that?
Actually, Jake, you know, that actually reminds me of another question I had for you.
Oh, please.
I find that when you start a project, you have a couple of ideas that are core. Like, these are the things that are not going to change. Everything else kind of is going to support these basic ideas. And Starship customization, I think, was one of those for me. I wanted Starship customization to be fun, important, something that you thought a lot about. And with that went the idea of you would have a fleet of starships as opposed to one starship. You know, I can imagine a whole other game where you just have one starship.
Right.
But kind of the probably inspired by XCOM. You know, the way your soldiers work together.
Right.
I think that's a cool mechanic, and I wanted to kind of be sure we had that in Starships. So the idea of customization, the idea of controlling a fleet of different vessels. And I probably the third idea that was fundamental to me was this mission adventures that probably inspired by the original Star Trek, but, you know, it was always a mission to make the galaxy a better place, but there would be a mystery about it, or there'd be this incredible variety of things you were doing out there.
I like it because you have the lead-ins with like the images. You know, you got the pretty dramatic images, which are a lead-in to the missions of, you know, the people who rule this planet are terrible. Please save us. Actually, yeah, yours are the missions in Starships are they're themed, which is really cool. So you get that nice lead-in of the screen, and that's all you need to kind of be like, all right, I've got a nice narrative wrapper for why this has meaning. I like that a lot, actually.
So what were the kind of core ideas with XCOM that you started off with? You know, this is kind of what it's got to be in this game.
Yeah, so the things that never went away were the probably number one is that make the soldiers valuable to the player, both tactically in terms of they should be the ones doing all the cool stuff, and then to make them have like let the player have an emotional investment in their soldiers. And so in the original game, in the very, very original XCOM, that was really, even without a lot of tools to do that, you could rename them. You just got really attached to them because they went on these missions and they had all these horrible experiences. And so you really started to invest emotion in them. So in XCOM, we just sort of pumped that up and we said, all right, well, we want to give them nicknames at a certain point. We want to allow you to customize what they look like. We want to give them classes so they all do different interesting things. And so that was really like the core pillar. And then the second one was to have major consequences. So on the strategy layer, countries could leave when their panic reached a certain point and they would never come back. And so soldiers would actually die in combat. And all of those things were big, serious consequences that you could not reverse. And so that was a big part of it too, is that you really felt like you were playing for high stakes when you played XCOM. And so in addition to the sense of the tactical being sort of the most important part of the game, and then getting into a loop with tactical, doing all the stuff on strategy, which gets you excited to go back into tactical, and then you get the pieces you need in tactical to work on stuff in strategy, and getting that loop going back and forth. So, I mean, those were sort of those are the core pillars of those are the core pillars of XCOM, as I say.
Yeah, actually, you bring up an interesting point. You talk about the loop when you're combining strategy level and a tactical level, and something we also do in Starships is we have the strategy layer and the tactical layer. It's kind of something I think we avoided for a while. I've talked about the covert action syndrome, which for me was too much strategy and too much tactical. And
people love that game.
It had its moments, but I like the game too. But I do feel it had the strategy was too interesting and the tactical was too interesting, and the two of them kind of fought each other.
Right. I have rephrased that saying of yours. I don't think it's very good, but I've been saying, Sid always says that one good game is better than two great games. Is that right?
That's good.
It's
it's thought provoking.
Right.
It's
thought provoking in the sense of you hear it, you're like, what the hell does it mean? What does he actually mean by that? But yes, the idea that, and you told me this, or when I was working on XCOM, you brought that up to me many times of like, where's the center of gravity?
Right.
Where's the center of gravity? What are you trying to do? Where's the heart of the game? Then the other games should really sort of drive the player back towards the one game. When you have two games like a strategy layer with tactical, you really should be driving the player back into tactical.
Right. And a lot of times the time spent will make that decision for you. If you're spending 3 minutes in the strategy layer and then 20 minutes in the tactical, then the tactical has to be the heart of the game, where the center of gravity is. Another example is Pirates, where the center of gravity was in the strategy. You spend most of your time traveling around the Caribbean, interacting with people, and you'd go into a ship battle or a sword fight, but they were quick enough that you never lost the bubble in terms of where you were headed, why you were headed there. And so the center of gravity doesn't have to be in the tactical. It can be in the strategy, but it has to be clearly somewhere. I think that's what we learned from covert action, where they were both parts of the game were fun and cool, but once you completed one of the tactical missions, a lot of times you'd kind of forgotten what the goal was in the strategy level.
Right.
And
I found you have to parcel out the rewards that each one of those games gives you. Like they can't do, if they were able to do the same thing, say for example, if you could achieve what you achieve in tactical missions, if you could somehow do that through another mechanic on the strategy layer, that's very dangerous, because then you'll be able to, that you can start to ignore one over the other. If they both have a very necessary role in terms of the rewards they give you, I think that helps as well. Like, the tactical a lot of times, and Starships is like XCOM. It's like that's how you get these awesome rewards that then sort of you go back to strategy, you do a little stuff here, upgrade, and then you want to go back in and use your new cool stuff. So.
Yeah, the idea of thinking of it as a loop, I think, is powerful. That,
Yeah.
that something happens in your tactical that you look forward to utilizing in the strategy layer, and then you do things in the strategy layer that make you look forward to the next tactical mission. And you're kind of always, again, looking ahead, looking forward, looking for, for the next. It's going to be cool.
You're always rolling downhill because everything you do is pushing you to move to, pushing you to move back to strategy real quick, which pushes you into tactical. It's actually kind of we always say one more turn, in Civ.
Right.
And the way Civ works is that there's always these different bars that are filling, and so you just kind of, they've got these really incremental things. I'll just take another turn. I'll take another turn until this bar fills. Take another turn until this thing is completed. And in strategy tactics games, it's kind of the loop is like, okay, you keep the tactical missions, and they're like perfect length in Starships, where they're nice and short, just to where they basically end right before you want them to. And so then you're like, okay, I'm not done playing. I'll go into strategy. I'll fiddle around a little bit, and you've still got enough like juice to play it. Then you jump right back in. So it's one more turn, kind of like Civ, but in its own way, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, if you can get the player thinking in the future, what am I going to do next? What's going to happen next? What's my plan? When that's certainly what Civ did well, but something I think we try to do in all our games is have the player thinking in the future about their plans and not trying to kind of figure out what just happened, which is
that's
a sign of a bad
It's
game.
the best is when you have a plan, you've made a long-term plan, and then the goal of the game is to come in and then say push you off the plan, either by saying, "Ooh, this is even cooler now, don't you want this?" Or they put up a roadblock and you say, "Okay, I've got to rethink how I want to get to that goal." The game can even say, "Here's a new goal that you've got to prioritize against your old goals," or "Here's a roadblock to prevent you from getting to your goal." And those moments of making a plan and then remaking a plan are so fun and addictive to say, like, okay, I've got control of this situation. Like, I've got mastery of this situation because I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this. And then everything feels meaningful. All your actions as a gamer feel meaningful. Like, I'm going to go on this mission to get that, and then I'm going to apply that there. That is, like, the heart. For me, that's, like, the best part of strategy games. And tactics strategy works really well for that. There's a game. We haven't looked at the game too much. Yeah. Not, I don't use the warp. You don't know where you're going when you jump in that thing? Or
that is correct, although there's a wonder that allows you to control jumping through the warp gates. For every rule, we've got a wonder to kind of break it.
Nice.
Okay. Ooh, we're getting hammered a little bit here. I think we've taken on a rather difficult mission. We're attacking the home planet of of this other civilization, and they have built a couple of megabots to defend their home planet. They're launching
megabots. No copyright infringement. Are you telling me nobody's made something called megabots before?
It's a generic. It's a generic term.
All right.
It's a generic term.
That just sounds like a toy that I could get.
That's
kids, ask your parents for megabots.
Get a good shot. Oh, ouch. Oh, these
guys. Did that say 0?
0, yeah.
Oh.
I think as a designer I'd get some sort of a break. Ooh, I'm gonna line up a good shot on this guy.
I like the facing a lot. That's not something it's kind of a naval, it kind of feels naval, which actually, it's always a nice, that works really well with a space theme. But yeah, it just feels very cool and, broadside. You don't have any broadside cannons, do you?
Right. Actually, naval was kind of one of the core models for making this game. I mean, the ships are named, corvettes, destroyers, battleships, etc. And the SS, this or that. And you're an admiral. So there's a lot of kind of naval terminology in the game because it's familiar. I think that it makes it feel like something familiar. You asked, so I'm going to go through this jump gate here.
Do it.
See what happens.
And whenever you make a science fiction, did that help? I guess you're behind the
no.
Okay.
It was your idea, Jake.
I should tell you, I'm not good at this game. But when you make a science fiction game, oh dear, see that's the killer shot is from behind, right?
Yes, you're definitely more vulnerable from behind. You gotta think about your facing. Is it? Again, another.
Oh dear.
Ouch! Oh man, I didn't like that ship anyway.
Well, easily solved. So they got around you again. So yeah, that
Yes,
positioning
they're pretty
Is that a
clever.
torpedo?
Pretty clever. That is a torpedo.
So they will
yeah.
detonate
They're
that
launching
thing.
torpedoes at me.
Okay.
Now, I do have to say that you were talking about consequences, et cetera. One of the decisions that we made with Starships is that your ships would not be permanently destroyed.
Right.
Like the ship I just got disabled there, I can repair that and bring it back in a future battle.
It's a function of the number of ships you have, or you just didn't like the idea of. Because to me, it feels like the right decision because it feels like I don't have enough ships for that to feel fair to me as a player.
Right. I think there are a couple issues there. One is we wanted to kind of create the same sense of attachment or investment in your individual ships, and give them kind of a history. Like I remember when 3 missions ago, that was a ship that saved my bacon,
Right.
or that you've invested this time in building it, and it would be tragic to lose that. I think you'd kind of feel like starting over or whatever.
Yeah.
And in XCOM, that's a very powerful motivation. I think that works really well. Here, we're going with kind of really want you to create this story, through a number of missions.
Yeah.
And so the consequences, you can make mistakes, and there are, you have to pay to repair that ship, but you're not really in a point where you kind of think, it's over.
Right. That's a start
You don't want to get into a hopeless situation,
Yeah.
that kind of spiral
Yep.
of doom, which is another one of our game design things that we watch out for.
Now, what's better to have? Is it? I assume it is balanced in such a way that what I wanted to try was also like just completely putting all my money into one ship. There's one massive Leviathan.
Right.
And then have just a bunch of like little terrible ships, I would just throw my flying monkeys at somebody and distract them, and then I'd bring up the monster.
Right. That's a viable strategy.
Okay,
I mean, one of the things we were looking for is a lot of different viable strategies. So perhaps one time you would play with a bunch of ships, but you say, next time I'm going to try with just one huge ship, or this time I'm playing with the Purity Affinity, but next time I want to play with the Supremacy, or I choose this leader, but next time I want to do this leader, or a big map, a small map. I mean, it comes down to kind of replayability to me, that you want to plant the seed in the player's mind when they're playing a game, but the next time I play this, I'm going to try this path, which looked interesting, but I chose another path this time, or that idea of replayability, I think, is kind of fundamental to almost all of the Firaxis games, that you're turning the player loose in this interesting world, but from then on they kind of follow their own path, create their own story, knowing that they can create a whole different story the next time they play.
That's the hardest part, isn't it? I mean, coming with mechanics that can create that sense of I mean, you could just go so deep. Like certain games, they go so deep and they create so much content that you can't see it, and maybe you want to try something else out. But strategy-wise, you have to come with mechanics that are interesting in a game that pushes you in a direction that next time you can say, oh, can I have a different experience if I play this other way? And balancing all those different things, that's always, I think that's very challenging.
Now, in XCOM, you had a very strong story thread going through that. Was there a tension between that and kind of allowing the player to make their own decisions?
Yeah, there was. I mean, I think that if you have that strong of a theme over the top of the experience, then it's very neat that first time, maybe the first 2 times you see those really pumped up cinematics, it feels very very neat. But then I think that then there is a tension between that and then the sense of, okay, if we want everybody to play over and over again, we need to allow the player avenue to tell their own stories, which I think in tactical, that certainly happened. You were able to sort of tell your own story of, okay, this mission went like this soldier had these experiences, but there is tension of putting a story over the top of a game like that. Like, you can't really imagine Civ with a strong linear storyline.
Right.
I don't think that would be very easy to do anyway.
But there are other reasons why you play XCOM the second time. I mean, you've seen a lot of the story, but there are other things that are going to maybe a difficulty level or trying a different
It's a lot of challenge or playing a certain way, and again, because the heart of the game I think is tactical, you do get those sorts of experiences where having a strong storyline isn't as big of an impact because the replayability comes out of those tactical missions and having those experiences that are hopefully fun over and over again. So
yeah, it's really interesting that we can make both work. You know, the very story-driven game and more of a free-form game like this. Well, I'm tempted to get back to our battle, but it looks like we're going to lose here. So
I want to win. So
maybe we'll save that.
At least they don't see you coming up behind them.
Right, I have cleverly snuck
many
up
thousands
behind
of kilometers away. I mean, you may show up and everybody's dead, but
I'm sure we'd eventually win this battle. But I've had such a fun time talking with you about some of the game design ideas and philosophies and things like that. So we'll save some more game play for our next.
Sounds
next
good. Then we can call it a win.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Right.
we'll cheat a few things and then we'll come back.
Great job.
All right. We promised an update on Pete. Those of you who watched our last live stream know that Pete ran into an unfortunate incident. I just want to assure
you. Depending on how you feel about Pete.
Exactly. Just want to assure you that he's recovering well, and we expect him to be back on our next live stream. Many people have asked about Pete. Well, not many. I think his mom called, but I want to assure you that that he'll be back next week. And as promised, we have a couple of questions that appeared on our...
Can I ask these, dude?
Take turns, but go ahead.
All right, well, I wouldn't be able to answer the Starship ones. Or I could, but I'd just be making stuff up, okay?
Go ahead.
Why have just one fleet? Why not many fleets?
That's a good question.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
That's really about... making the work that you do in the strategy layer count in the tactical layer. There are actually a couple of missions where you just get one of your flagship is the only ship you get to use.
I like those.
And some missions where some of your other ships come in a little later. But trying to manage the location of two or more fleets and kind of keep that picture in your mind again would make... I would call the covert action rule that by making the strategy game more complicated in terms of positioning multiple fleets, etc., it would start to compete in your brain space with what's happening in the tactical. You'd come out of one battle and say, okay, which fleet was that, and where's my other fleet, and what's going on? Just feels like there's a nice narrative story thread that goes from one mission to the next with your fleet. And the consequences of what happened in the last battle are immediately effective. If you damaged your fleet, you have to go repair them. You can't jump to another fleet that's doing just fine. You have to kind of deal with this consistent story thread, which I think works best for this game.
And I do like a lot of interesting stuff comes out of basically since you have one fleet. It's kind of about where you are,
Right.
So you can't manage everything, and you see other civilizations moving around, and so I think that's
and just
cool.
imagine they also had multiple fleets.
Right.
Things would get pretty hairy.
Here's a question. It says multiplayer ?
Multiplayer ? That I assume they're asking about multiplayer. I think what we've discovered especially in these kind of games that combine strategy and tactics, it's difficult to implement the entire game in a multiplayer mode. The fundamental problem is, what if two players are having a tactical battle? What do the rest of the players do? Right. I think you solved that pretty elegantly in XCOM with having the tactical battles be available in multiplayer, but not trying to play the entire game. That's a long way of saying Starships is a single-player game. It's not a multiplayer game.
Right. Okay. Are there environmental effects that mess with shields or sensors?
Yes, every every mission that you go into, there's something unique about that arena. It could be that the asteroids are moving. It could be that the sensor ranges are less and limited because of environmental effects. It could be that you take a little bit of damage every turn. There's a whole bunch of different effects
That one's hard. I had that happen to me. When you move, you lose damage, and I just had my ships just going down like crazy. I probably shouldn't have moved as much as I did.
Yeah, there you want to try and stay. But one of the effects that certain star systems have is that the ranges of sensors are reduced. There's another effect. The question was about shields as well, where shields are either more effective in this star system or less effective in another star system.
That's a good question. Here's a good question. Do you prefer presenting a lot of info to players and letting them figure out combos, or do you prefer hiding stats and info?
I think the basic information should be very clear to the player, and then the fun is in using that information, using those concepts and ideas in interesting ways. I think Civilization is probably a great example of that, where the basic combat system, the basic growth system, the way science happens, is all pretty clear and out there for the player to understand, but making the trade-offs, deciding where to put your resource, etc., is where the actual gameplay happens. So confusing the player is not a good idea. Hiding things, I don't believe in that. But even knowing all the kind of basic fundamentals of the game, the game becomes interesting when you start to make those trade-offs and decisions.
Yeah, I mean, if you have information that the player could use, you have to show it to them, right? I mean, you don't want to keep that away from them, but at the same time, I always think for myself, like when a UI screen gets too complicated, it's not really UI's fault. It's kind of the designer's fault. At a certain point, you say, that means maybe I should, or remember on Civ Rev, somebody would come in and ask us to explain a concept, and if we were both going like, well, we'd be like, maybe that one's a little complicated.
You should take that out.
If we can't explain that in about a sentence or two, it's maybe not the best idea. So how do you determine enemy strength on missions?
Actually, that ties back to the previous question. There's a lot of information available to you before you go into a mission. The residents of the star system have already scoped out the enemy, and so you can see the characteristics of their starships, their speed, the weapons that they have that you're going to go up against. And that ties into another kind of fun feature, which is you can customize your starships up to the last minute. So once you see what the enemy has, you can then kind of go back and reconfigure your starships for the battle that's coming up. So you know both the starships that you're going up against and what the mission is, whether it's a combat mission or a holdout for 5 turns or escort. So you can kind of make those last minute tweaks to your fleet before you go into the battle.
Yep. How do your crews get upgraded?
Your crews get upgraded when your starship disables an enemy starship. There's a chance that the crew of that starship will get upgraded, and that gives you a 10% efficiency increase for every step of crew improvement that you get, and that applies to all your systems. Your weapons are 10% better, your shields are 10% better.
Whoa, so that's better than almost anything.
It's a very cool upgrade.
And you can only get that through combat, right?
That is correct.
Get that through sync? That's good.
Going through combat. Yep.
How are people going to learn about the connection between starships and beyond Earth?
Well, there's this thing called the internet.
Yes. And go on, tell me more.
And I'm assuming that once 1 or 2 players discover the connections, they might share that information with other players. But we're leaving that to be discovered by our players, what the connections are between starships and beyond Earth.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jake, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You here.
I love just being around you, big guy. I love just talking to you about designers.
Just love talking about design.
Love talking.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. I hope you join us again next week for our live stream. I'm Sid Meier.
I'm Jake Solomon.
So long.